Imagine buying a brand new car. You walk up to it, you put your hand directly on the hood, and you recite this highly specific, formalized prayer.
Right. You're asking the creator for the vehicle's goodness and seeking protection from its potential harm.
Exactly. Now, I want you to imagine taking that exact same ritual, literally word for word, and applying it to your spouse on your wedding night.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty jarring image for anyone looking from the outside in.
Oh, totally.
But it immediately reveals this worldview where, the spiritual mechanics of everyday life are completely unified. There's just no separation between the material and the spiritual.
Wow. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating mission. You, the listener, have probably encountered, I don't know, dozens of modern relationship philosophies, right?
Oh, for sure. The ones that tell you love is supposed to be, like, totally spontaneous.
Yeah, exactly. A figure it out as you go adventure. Well, today we are exploring a framework that leaves absolutely zero room for guesswork.
None at all.
We are diving into a text called A Tranquil Bond, Second Edition by Abdul Basit Abdallah. And it's this modern, staggeringly detailed guidebook on Islamic marriage. It draws heavily from historical scholars to script nearly every possible human interaction within a relationship.
But, before we really get into the mechanics of this, we need to set a clear baseline for you.
Definitely.
Because this text is deeply rooted in specific religious doctrines and, frankly, highly traditional gender roles. So our goal today is not to endorse these viewpoints.
Right, and we're not here to critique them either.
Exactly. Our objective is just to impartially unpack the machinery of this belief system. We want to understand the exact microscopic framework the author is presenting.
So let's start at the very beginning. Before a couple can even think about building this tranquil bond, how do they actually make the decision to get married?
Right, because in Western culture, you might date for years or, I don't know, make a pros and cons list.
Yeah, how does this text handle that initial decision?
Well, the framework introduces this formal practice called istikhara. When a Muslim is confronted with a major life choice, like marriage, they don't just sit around and ponder it.
Okay.
They're instructed to actively seek the counsel of the Creator through a very specific ritual. It involves performing a 2 rakah voluntary prayer.
Hold on. For those of us not familiar with the terminology, what exactly is a rakah?
Good question. A raka'at is a prescribed physical unit of Islamic prayer. So it involves a sequence of motions, standing, bowing, prostrating on the floor, and sitting.
Oh, wow. So it's very physical.
It is. So you do 2 complete cycles of those physical movements, and then you recite a meticulously worded supplication.
And what are they actually saying in that supplication? Are they, asking for a sign?
Not exactly. They're essentially acknowledging human limitation. The prayer explicitly states, you are capable and I am not. You know and I know not.
That's a really powerful way to phrase it.
Yeah, it is. You ask that if this specific marriage is good for your religion, your livelihood, and your ultimate welfare, that it be ordained. But if it's bad for those things, you ask for it to be distanced from you.
I see. But practically speaking, how do you get the answer? If I'm making a major life decision, my instinct would be to go ask a mentor or maybe a religious leader to do this prayer for me.
Right, someone more qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you outsource this? Does the text allow that?
The author actually explicitly shuts that down. You cannot outsource istikhara.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't go to a psychic or a local scholar to perform it on your behalf. The individual has to do the physical and spiritual work themselves.
That's fascinating.
And regarding the answer, the text clarifies a pretty major misconception. You are not mandated to suddenly see, like a glowing sign in a dream.
Right.
The ultimate result you're looking for is simply a feeling of ease in your heart afterward.
Man, that is a massive shift in pressure. You do the structured ritual, and then you just trust your internal emotional alignment. Now, assuming that feeling of ease is there, the text immediately pivots to the economics of the union. And this is where the rules become incredibly rigid regarding the dowry.
Yes, the dowry is a non-negotiable pillar here. But we really need to understand the underlying logic.
Yeah.
It's not a symbolic gift or some gesture of goodwill.
Right. The text defines it strictly as compensation to the woman.
Exactly. The author's logic is that the woman was previously illegal for the man to be intimate with. Because she's now being made legal to him through this contract, he must compensate her for that access.
So it's a literal transactional boundary. And the text emphasizes that this asset goes completely to her. right?
Yes, 100%.
I mean, it might be paid to her family elders for logistical reasons, but there can be absolutely zero deductions by her family.
None at all.
But what really caught my eye is how the author pushes back against the modern complaint that weddings and dowries are, too expensive. He actually points to the story of Moses.
Yeah, it's a really striking comparison. The text references the scriptural narrative where Moses herded flocks of sheep for years in the desert just to earn a woman's hand in marriage.
Wow.
The author argues that illicit relationships have never been more expensive than marriage, meaning true commitment requires actual striving.
But at the same time, it shouldn't bankrupt the guy. There's an anecdote in the text about a woman named Sulaim that totally flips the idea of a financial dowry on its head.
Oh, that's a great example.
Yeah, a man named Abu Tala wanted to marry her, and she basically said, I don't want your gold. If you revert to Islam, that is my dowry.
Which perfectly illustrates the mechanism of the dowry, right?
Yeah.
It's a mandatory requirement, but the actual currency is entirely defined by whatever the woman herself deems valuable.
Right. It can be gold, livestock, or in her case, pure spiritual currency.
Exactly.
Okay, so the spiritual council is complete, the dowry is negotiated, but you can't just run off to Vegas and elope. There is a deeply formal process to actually authorize this contract.
Yeah, this brings us to the siga, or the tying of the knot. And the absolute most critical element here, without which the marriage is completely invalid, by the way, is the presence of the wali,
The guardian.
right? The guardian for the bride.
And the text is unflinching about the fact that this wali must be male, a father, a grandfather, or what the book calls an asib. What is an asib, by the way?
So an asib refers to a male relative from the paternal line. So that would be like a brother from the same father or a paternal uncle. The maternal line just doesn't carry this specific legal weight in this framework.
Okay, help me understand the underlying logic here. Why is the author insisting this role be strictly 100% male?
Well, the rationale provided in the text is based on a specific view of gender psychology. The author states that men are preferred for this role because of their insight and ability to make rational decisions devoid of emotion.
So it's almost like a financial fiduciary.
That's actually a great way to put it.
Yeah, because a fiduciary is legally obligated to act in your best interest without getting swept up in the emotion of, say, a stock market crash. So the text is positioning the male guardian as an emotional shield.
That is the exact mechanism. The explicit reasoning is protection. The text claims that a woman's innocence might cause her to be easily deceived by a suitor's smooth speech or, his attractive appearance.
Right.
Therefore, it's the male guardian's duty to objectively evaluate if the suitor is truly of the same faith and character.
Which leads to a really interesting prohibition. Because the guardian holds so much power, the text outright bans a practice called shigar.
Yes.
This is where families try to bypass the dowry entirely by swapping daughters. A father basically says, I'll marry my daughter to you if you marry your daughter to me, and we just cancel out the dowry payments.
Right.
The text forbids using a woman as barter.
It's a major safeguard. The system relies on a patriarchal hierarchy, obviously, but it strictly enforces individual rights within that hierarchy. The woman's right to her personal compensation cannot be traded away by her guardian.
So we have the guardian, we have the dowry. How does the ceremony actually play out?
So the ceremony requires two just witnesses to ensure the union is public, which differentiates it from, a secret illicit relationship. An imam typically officiates by reading the Khutbatul Hajjah.
Let's define that really quickly.
Sure. The Khutbatul Hajjah is a specific opening sermon. It's a standardized formula of words used to praise the Creator, ask for divine guidance, and seek refuge from the evils of the soul.
Okay.
Following that, 3 distinct Quranic verses are recited that emphasize speaking the truth and maintaining reverence.
And the celebration that follows this ceremony, the wedding party, has intense physical boundaries. The text strictly prohibits mixed gatherings.
Yes, very strictly.
A bride cannot sit with the groom if there are men present, and the groom cannot be with the bride among her female guests.
Which serves as the perfect transition into the private life of the couple. We're moving from the highly public, legally witnessed contract into the absolute seclusion of the wedding night.
Right.
And if you thought the public rules were detailed, the private etiquette is where the granularity of this text truly shines.
It really does. But before it gets into the intense rules, it actually starts with an emphasis on gentleness.
Oh, yeah, that part is lovely.
The text shares this story about the Prophet Muhammad on his wedding night with Aisha. She was incredibly shy. So the woman who had helped adorn her for the wedding, a woman named Asma'u, had to gently coax Aisha just to accept a cup of milk from his hand. It sets this tone of easing into the vulnerability of the moment.
But immediately following that gentle icebreaker, the highly specific rituals begin. This is where your observation from the start of our deep dive comes in.
The car prayer.
Exactly. The groom is instructed to place his hand on the forelock of the bride, the front of her hair, and recite a supplication.
He is asking the Creator for the goodness within her and seeking refuge from her potential evilness. It's staggering to think about using the exact same spiritual formula for a human being and a mode of transportation.
It reinforces that everything in existence has a spiritual dimension that must be actively managed. After this forelock prayer, before any physical intimacy occurs, the couple is required to pray 2 voluntary raka'at together. The groom leads, and the bride stands behind him.
Why that specific formation?
They're establishing their spiritual hierarchy and unity before they establish their physical unity. They are aligning themselves under the Creator first.
And then, literally moments before the act of intimacy itself, there's another required supplication to ward off the devil, specifically asking that any child resulting from the union be protected.
Right.
The text also lays down absolute physical boundaries, the major one being the total prohibition of anal intercourse, which is framed as an act that incurs divine wrath.
And the intense choreography continues even after the intimacy concludes. The text details a meticulous physical purification process called the ghusl, or ritual bath.
Right, the bath.
This is not just hopping in the shower to rinse off. It is a step-by-step spiritual reset.
The level of detail here is mind-boggling. You declare your intention, you wash your hands to the wrists, wash away impurities, and then perform ablution like you would for a regular prayer, but you delay washing your feet.
Yes.
And then the author provides a very specific instruction. You must dip your damp palms onto your head and rub it. And he actually gives a biological reason for this.
Yeah, the author blends 7th century medical understanding with religious ritual. The text explains that during the discharge of semen, the pores of the hair open up.
Okay.
If you were to just pour water directly onto your head while those pores are wide open, the water could enter them and cause a headache. So dampening the head first supposedly closes the pores.
It is wild to see that kind of physical causality embedded in a spiritual manual. You're then instructed to pour a handful of water over the head exactly 3 times and then wash the entire body.
And there's an order to it. You are highly encouraged to wash the right side of your body before the left and the upper body before the lower.
Every single physical motion is tethered to a divine script.
Literally every motion.
So they survive the incredibly choreographed wedding night. The sun comes up. How do they actually operate this newly formed household?
Well, the first major event is the walima, the wedding banquet, which typically happens 3 days after consummation. The rules here are deeply tied to social equity.
How so?
The text mandates that you must invite righteous people, but you are absolutely forbidden from only inviting the wealthy. You must invite the poor. Hosting a banquet that discriminates against the poor is actually considered a sin.
During this banquet, the bride is allowed to serve the male guests, but only under the condition of strict hijab. And the book gives a checklist for this hijab. It has to cover the whole body except the face and hands. It must be thick. It can't show her body shape. It cannot resemble men's clothing. But there is one rule that stood out to me.
Which one?
It cannot be perfumed. Why is perfume given the same weight as visual modesty?
Because the concept of hijab in this framework isn't just about covering skin. It's about eliminating any sensory trigger that could provoke desire outside of the marriage.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. A visual boundary stops the eye, but a sensory boundary, like perfume, can bypass the eye entirely and attract attention. It's a holistic barrier.
That makes a lot of sense within their logic. This concept of strict boundaries extends to the decorations inside the home, too.
Yes, it does.
The groom is instructed to forbid certain things, like hanging pictures of animate beings on the walls, or brides shaving their eyebrows and wearing false nails. But then we hit the absolute ban on wearing golden wedding rings.
Yeah, gold is generally prohibited for men in this belief system anyway. But the author goes much further to prove that the wedding ring itself, even for women, is a direct imitation of disbelievers.
Wait, help me understand this. To prove this point, the author cites a 1960 edition of a British lifestyle magazine called Women. He literally quotes a writer named Angela Talbot.
Yes.
How does a vintage London magazine end up dictating an Islamic household rule? What is the leap in logic there?
The author uses the magazine as anthropological evidence. He quotes the magazine explaining the Western myth of the vena amoris, the vein of love that supposedly runs directly from the left ring finger to the heart.
Okay.
The magazine also details an ancient Christian origin where a groom would place the ring on the thumb, first finger, and second finger while saying, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost," landing on the third finger on the word Amen.
Oh, wow. So the author is looking at this mid-century British advice column and saying, look, their own magazines admit this tradition is rooted in Christian theology and Roman myth.
Precisely.
Therefore, it completely violates the boundary of imitating other faiths.
It's a fascinating cross-cultural citation used to enforce a strict internal boundary. But, we must balance these incredibly strict regulatory lists with how the text handles emotional warmth.
Yes, definitely.
The framework demands structural rigidity, but it insists on emotional softness.
It really does. The text explicitly warns husbands against maltreating their wives, and it shares this beautiful, deeply human anecdote about the Prophet Muhammad.
I love this story.
It's so good. It was Eid Day celebration, and some Ethiopians were playing games with sticks. Aisha wanted to watch. So the Prophet stood in front of her, and he literally lowered his shoulders so she could rest her chin on him and watch the games over his shoulder.
And the psychology of that moment is just fascinating. He kept asking her, "Are you satisfied?" And she kept saying no.
Right.
But as she later admitted, she didn't even care about the game. She was just testing how long he would stand there for her. She wanted to measure how dear she was to him and, frankly, show off her status to the other wives.
It's such a tender, highly relatable marital moment embedded right next to strict rules about hair pores and gold rings.
It really is.
But this brings up the elephant in the room. People are still people. They get tired, they get annoyed, they fight. How does a framework with this many rules handle the messy reality of a marital dispute?
Well, the final section of the text tackles conflict resolution. It starts with scriptural precedent, referencing Surah An-Nisa from the Quran, which deals with a wife feeling cruelty or desertion from her husband.
And the text highlights a stark truth about human nature here. It quotes a verse saying that human inner selves are swayed by greed, meaning when we argue, our instinct is to fiercely guard our own rights. We just want to win.
But the scripture advocates that making peace, even if it means relinquishing one of your rights, is better than divorce.
Right.
The text uses the story of Sauda, another wife of the prophet. As she grew older, she feared the marriage might end, so she voluntarily gifted her night, the scheduled time the prophet spent with her, to his beloved wife Aisha. The text positions this not as a defeat, but as a valid, scripturally backed strategy for maintaining harmony through accommodation.
But then the author executes this massive, highly unexpected stylistic pivot. We go from ancient scriptural stories directly into a 1967 Western corporate management theory.
Yes. The author introduces Louis Pondy's organizational conflict model. This was a framework developed in the 60s to explain how different departments or managers fight within a corporation.
That is so specific.
Right. And the author seamlessly maps it onto a husband and wife.
It's brilliant. Let's walk through how this actually works. Let's say a couple is fighting over, I don't know, how late guests are allowed to stay at their house. How does Pondy's model play out in the text?
So the author breaks it into 5 stages. Stage 1 is latent conflict. The conditions for an argument exist. Maybe the husband loves hosting late, and the wife values early sleep, but it hasn't popped off yet.
Okay.
Stage 2 is perceived conflict. The husband notices his wife sighing heavily while the guests are still there. Stage 3 is felt conflict. Now the negative emotions are brewing. Resentment is building in both of them.
And then the guests finally leave, and we hit stage 4, manifest conflict. The actual screaming match in the kitchen about boundaries.
Exactly. And finally, stage 5 is the aftermath. The text warns that if the argument is just suppressed rather than truly resolved, it will poison the relationship.
Makes sense.
To prevent that, the text outlines Pondy's 5 management techniques for the couple to use. Avoidance, a combination which links perfectly back to the story of Sauda we just discussed. Compromise, competition where one spouse bulldozes the other, and collaboration, where you maximize focus on both people's concerns.
The synthesis here is just amazing. The author takes timeless religious scripture about human greed and harmonizes it with clinical academic corporate theory.
Yeah, it really bridges the gap.
It suggests that a tranquil bond requires both divine obedience and highly evolved emotional intelligence. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the journey we've just taken through this manual. We started with the istikhara, the formalized spiritual ritual to even decide to marry.
Right.
We explored the non-negotiable economics of the dowry, the protective role of the male guardian, and the intensely choreographed intimacy of the wedding night, down to the biological theories behind the ritual bath.
Down to the pores.
Exactly. We looked at the strict boundaries of the household, including the ban on golden rings, all balanced by the mandate for tender kindness. And finally, weathering the storm of conflict by merging the Quran with 1960s corporate models, it is a relationship defined by overwhelming intentionality.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating parallel to consider.
Yeah.
In today's highly secular modern culture, we see a massive rise in, biohacking and habit stacking.
Oh, totally.
People are desperate for morning routines, sleep optimization protocols, and highly structured communication frameworks to fix their relationships.
Hmm.
We crave microscopic control over our daily habits to achieve a better life.
Yeah, we really do.
What this text reveals is that the human desire for a staggeringly precise, microscopic blueprint for living isn't a new phenomenon at all.
Yeah.
We just replaced divine scripts with productivity podcasts.
Oh, wow.
It makes you wonder, is our modern pursuit of extreme lifestyle optimization just a secular attempt to find the exact same tranquil bond that this 7th century theological framework was promising all along?
That is such a profound point. Think about that the next time you're trying to figure out the rules of your own relationships or optimizing your morning routine. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.